Does Pathfinder 2e have the blaster caster that some of its players have wanted? The new book, Rage of Elements, comes out August 3, and it has the new class, the Kineticist, and we will see if that's what it is. Players looking for a straightforward, blasting, damage-dealing spellcasting class in Pathfinder might be disappointed, because spellcasters fill a certain role in Pathfinder parties. You rely on martial classes for consistent single-target damage dealing, and spellcasters, their strength is their versatility. They can do that sometimes, but they can also do a whole variety of other things, including AoE damage and lots of utility and buffing, debuffing, and spells that can really tilt the playing field in a combat. I did an experiment on my Discord server almost 2 years ago now, where we pitted 4 marshals against 4 casters, and people should see that video for the result. But the bottom line was that neither was stronger than the other, but they each fulfilled different roles. A year ago, in the Dark Archive book, there was a new class called the Psychic, a spellcaster that does powerful damage with its cantrips, and I asked if that was the blaster caster that people are looking for. While it was true that it can do a good amount of damage and have a lot of impact with its cantrips, it wasn't a very straightforward class. It's one of the more complex classes in the game. There arguably is still a niche not met by any of the current classes for people who just want to hit and kill things with their magic. In comes the Kineticist from the new book, Rage of Elements. This will be in the spirit of my old shopping guides that I did for other classes before on my channel. And this will actually be a 3-part series. In this video, I'll do an overview and start with a thematic overview of the class, then give analogues of what players coming from D&D 5th edition can compare this class to from that system, talk about why you would want to choose it and why you might not want to choose it. Then I'll go over its core mechanics as a class. I'll also talk about the Kineticist archetype, which any other character in Pathfinder can take as Pathfinder's way of multiclassing, and finally talk about a new subclass of the Barbarian called the Elemental Instinct. In part 2, I'm going to do a combat demonstration showing the Kineticists in action using 5 different Kineticists. Then in part 3, I'm going to highlight a few awesome abilities that Kineticists can get. I am Ronald, the Rules Lawyer. I am a lawyer who runs and plays tabletop RPGs. My favorite system is Pathfinder 2e. I also teach tabletop games, including board games, to students. Make sure to subscribe to my channel and ring the bell to get notified about these other parts that will be coming out. And if you want 7-day early access to most of my videos, then support my Patreon. The link will be in the description. Part 2 on the Kineticist will not come out for several days. My series called D&D Monks But Good will be coming out this week. Also an exclusive for supporters of my Patreon is the 3-hour stream where people on my Discord and I react to the Kineticist class. We go through its features, its feats, and other parts of the book. Now on to Rage of Elements. This book has a street date, I believe, of August 3rd, and that's probably the date when its rules go online on Archives of Nethys. And this was a complimentary early PDF given to me by Paizo for review purposes. Like the other Pathfinder non-core rulebooks, this wears a number of hats. It's a rulebook, and also it is a book of lore. The first 60 pages are options for characters. This includes familiars, eidolons, and companions who are elementals, new backgrounds, including uncommon and rare ones, 2 new Geniekin versatile heritages that cover the 2 new elements in this book, wood and metal, a revised elementalist archetype, and changes to spells from Secrets of Magic to incorporate the 2 new elements. Then we get 6 sections, 24 pages each. Each covers a different element and gives lore, elemental lords, new magic spells, magic items, and monsters. Then we have 10 pages of similar material, but covering things that are hybrid, that have more than one element. We also have this sidebar that comments on the updates for the Pathfinder Remaster, changes to some names, and the removal of alignments and spell schools. We also have our usual niceties that aid in navigation, this nice sidebar on the right-hand side to find a specific section in the book. And of course, what I call the gloss dex. It's an index that also has definitions of terms in the index itself. So the thematic overview. This is Avatar: The Last Airbender. You get to shape and manipulate elements to do things you want. And by the way, there is an official Avatar role-playing game, but I haven't played it, I'm not familiar with it, and I'd like to know more about it in the comments. As a fan of the show myself, I do look forward, however, to what Pathfinder does for this concept, because Pathfinder kind of shines, I think, when it comes to tactical combat and giving abilities that are really flavorful and mechanically fun. In addition to the usual elements of Earth, air, fire, and water, you have two more elements that Pathfinder adds, metal and wood. And you can see the descriptions on the screen. They are what you would expect. Fire, for example, is passionate and can be very destructive. And I'll just read out what metal and wood do. And these just sounded very interesting to me and give you a sense of the thought put into them. Metal is a melancholic element. It carries a sense of finality with it. Like a play whose sad ending is clear from the opening scene, metal never destroys with speed or passion. Instead, it brings gradual but ensured destruction, like a rusty hinge that eventually becomes stuck. And wood is purifying and always growing. Wood is an element of spring storms and rising tempers. In the elemental cycle, wood feeds into fire, providing the fuel that stokes great infernos. Elemental wood is a bountiful source of energy, perpetually replenishing its reserves, and can burrow through any barrier with ease. I appreciate that Paizo created 6 very flavorful and distinct elements here, with an eye probably toward mechanical balance. Now, what are analogues that can be made to things in D&D 5th edition? First, the Warlock. In D&D, their signature ability, well, for most of them, is Eldritch Blast. They're able to, as a cantrip, they're able to consistently do energy damage throughout the day. They're able to do consistent, powerful energy damage consistently. The other would be the 4 Elements Monk, which has magical abilities to manipulate the 4 elements. But unlike the monk, the Kineticist does not deal with ki. It does not have to track a resource, and in fact, it doesn't really have to track any resources, as we'll soon see. So why would you want to be a kineticist, and why would you maybe not want to be one? Well, first, be a kineticist if you want to blast, blast, blast. This is the class that can do elemental attacks at will over and over again. They are consistent. They don't have to track spell slots. They, unlike the 4 Elements Monk, don't need to spend ki. They can just blast, blast, blast. You don't just blast, you also have more dramatic elemental effects that include big blasts, but also utility effects, but also other effects, and Paizo was really creative with some of them. You also have versatility. Nearly all of the elements give you the option of blasting a physical damage type as well as a elemental type. And as you build your character and level up, you can get access to more energy types. Because of the prevalence of resistances and weaknesses, being versatile is very strong in this system. Also, be a kineticist if you like managing your element, if you like the idea of building up for a bigger effect, and having an aura that circles around you that you can leverage for certain effects. You also get utility. You get to shape your element in the environment as a base class feature, and there's a lot of feats that let you do more things with your element. So be a kineticist if you want to be a blaster. This is our go-to class in Pathfinder. However, it does come with some caveats that I should point out. First, it's not as damagey as a martial. You're going to be doing perhaps comparable damage to a martial, but you need to spend 2 actions to do more damage with your blast. And if you plan to blast from range, you're going to have the usual lower damage that ranged attacks generally have in Pathfinder for good reason. You have an advantage being safe from danger and being able to attack foes without having to spend an action to go up to them. Also, your big effects are not as strong as a spellcaster's. Now, I said a few minutes ago that spellcasters are considered weak by some players who are new to Pathfinder, but it would be more accurate to say have a different expectation of what a spellcaster should do than what they actually see in Pathfinder. But it's still true, particularly as you get past the first few levels, that spellcasters do some pretty strong things. As a kineticist, your big powers will not be as dramatic, and there's a simple explanation for that. Your powers have no limit. You can do them any number of times per day, whereas spellcasters have to manage especially their highest level spell slots. As a result, a kineticist is kind of a blend of both martials and casters. And while we have two other classes that kind of incorporate aspects of both, the magus and the summoner, this is the first class that actually blends aspects of both through the same abilities, if that makes sense. This actually may be the first class that kind of sits somewhere in the middle. It doesn't cast spells, but it's like a caster. It doesn't fight primarily with weapons, but it's kind of like a martial. It is beyond the martial-caster divide. The Kineticist from 1st edition Pathfinder I really liked, but it was also really complicated. When I taught my middle school after-school program and a kid wanted to play the Kineticist, I would ask them, are you sure? Because there was a lot of work involved in building the character and explaining it to them, and also still in just playing it session to session. There's a lot to manage, and I really looked forward to seeing what 2nd edition would do to the class. Could it retain its feel while also streamlining the class and making it easier to play? And I think they accomplished their objective. First of all, here is the iconic Yoon, the iconic Kineticist from 1st edition. She has now grown up and become a young woman in 2nd edition, which is kind of cool. So let's go over the basic features of the Kineticist class. Its key attribute, and I assume it's called attribute because of leaving the OGL, is Constitution. This is the first class that has Constitution as its key attribute, and it has a hit die of 8. However, that combined with your high Constitution means you're going to have a good number of hit points. These are your proficiencies on the right-hand side. You are trained only in simple weapons and in light armor, which is similar to what some spellcasters get in this system. In fact, I would say their proficiencies are caster-ish. With the light armor and simple weapons. They also have their kineticist abilities scale up at the same levels that spellcasters' spellcasting scales up. They become expert at 7th level, masters at 15th level, and legendary at 19th level. However, more like martials, their defense goes up to master at 19th level, and they have a good number of hit points with their high constitution. They also will have godly fortitude saves with their high constitution and becoming legendary at 15th level. The key thing going on thematically with them is the kinetic gate. They have a supernatural conduit to the appropriate elemental planes. Whether they have 1 or 2 gates determines their subclass, but I'll go over that later after going over some basics. You get a kinetic aura, which has your element swirling around you in a 10-foot emanation. And you have to spend an action to activate this aura. And you cannot do your kineticist powers, which are called impulses, without first activating this aura. Your impulses, if they allow you to choose an element, you must have a kinetic aura that has that element. If you can channel more than one element, then pieces of all of your elements are included in your kinetic aura. The aura goes away when you dismiss it, when you get knocked out, or you use an ability that's so powerful that you have to overflow in order to trigger it. One important thing to note now is that when you channel your element, you get to do at the same time a 1-action blast or a 1-action stance impulse. Impulse, again, is the term for your kineticist powers. Now onto your basic ability, your elemental blast. This can be either a melee or a ranged attack, and it could be either 1 action or 2 actions. When it's a ranged attack, you normally don't add anything to your die roll. And as you can see, you can do a d6 or a d8 of damage with your blast. When you do it in melee as a melee attack, you add your strength modifier. As an impulse, this does not have the manipulate trait. You don't have to use your hands to do it, which is very important. That means it does not trigger a number of enemy reactions. Instead, it requires concentration, which does trigger some reactions, but fewer of them. But that often means you're able to do this in melee just fine. Why would you use 2 actions instead? Well, when you do that, you get to add your Constitution modifier to your damage. Constitution, you will want to probably get to an 18, I think, unless there's some insightful comments in the comments section, because it also determines the accuracy of your impulses and how hard it is to resist them. The other reason to spend 2 actions is that if you choose the subclass of having a single elemental gate, you unlock what's called an impulse junction, which is an added effect, which I'll explain when we get there. But this, using 2 actions instead of 1 to make your blast more powerful, is the way Pathfinder 2e simulates building up your reserves. It's how you manage your action economy in the 3-action economy. Importantly, it has the attack traits, so it contributes to and is also affected by the multiple attack penalty. You can see the kind of blast done by each element here, and most of them, the exception being fire, can do a type of physical damage. Air and fire have the advantage of being able to shoot far. These are maximum ranges, not range increments. Every 4 levels after level 1, you get to increase your damage from the blast by 1 die. This means you will not be spending money on striking runes to keep your damage up with your main attack. This frees up more money for you to buy a staff over the course of your adventuring career, like a spellcaster probably would. But at the same time, you will want to get a gate attenuator starting at level 3 to increase your accuracy with your attacks. This is a level 3 item that adds +1 to your attack rolls, but not to your DCs. It additionally gives you a spell that you can cast once a day, and at higher levels you can get this attack to be +2. The major version is level 17 and is an apex item and can increase your Constitution modifier. Now on to your subclass. You get to be either single gate or dual gate. When you choose your subclass, you get to add 2 impulse feats. These are a type of class feat for the Kineticist that each give you a new power. If you have a single gate, your impulse feats obviously need to come from that element only. If you're a dual gate, then you need to have 1 impulse feat from each of your elements. The advantage of specializing and being single gate is that if you do an impulse that costs at least 2 actions, and this can be your elemental blast, then you get your impulse junction. Depending on the element of the impulse you're using, you get a special effect, and they are listed here. With air, you can move up to half your speed. With earth, you get a +1 bonus to your AC until the start of your next turn. With fire, you get to increase the die size of that impulse by 1 step. With metal, anytime a creature touches you, such as with an unarmed attack, they receive acid, electricity, or piercing damage. With water, you can push a creature some distance, and with wood, you give yourself temporary hit points until the start of your next turn. You get these 2 impulse feats in addition to a class feat at level 1, so you actually start with 3 class feats, unlike any other class. You get 4, maybe 5 impulses as a level 1 Kineticist in Pathfinder 2e. Yet another demonstration of what many Pathfinder vets say, which is start at level 1. Now, I said this was a simple class. It, like other Pathfinder characters, involves making more choices at character creation, but in combat, and I think the combat demonstration will show, it's relatively straightforward to play. It does mean you have more than just I blast. You probably have 2 or 3 abilities that you can use in combat that are competing for your actions. Okay, on to base Kinesis. This is kind of like Prestidigitation and Druidcraft for your element. You get to do one of these 3 things. You get to generate your element, move your element, or suppress your element. 30-foot range, and the target must be light, bulk, or less, and these parameters increase as you level up. Speaking of leveling up, at 3rd level, you get Extract Element. If you are a fire kineticist and you go to the elemental plane of fire, you are not screwed. Basically, if you encounter creatures that have the trait of your element, you can, as an action, draw matter of its element into your aura. It takes untyped damage, and you can also make that creature more susceptible to your element, and you can turn their immunity into just resistance, and you can also, if they have a resistance, you can ignore that. As you level up, in addition to getting class feats, skill feats, general feats, and ancestry feats like other Pathfinder classes, your big way to customize as a kineticist is Gates Threshold. Think of this as your level 1 subclass choice, but you get to continue to branch out or specialize further into one or more of your elements. At 5th level and every 4 levels after, you get to either expand the portal or fork the path. First, fork the path. This lets you just add a new element to your kinetic elements, and you get an impulse feat of your level or lower of that element. Expand the portal means you attune more precisely to one of your elements. So you also gain an impulse feat here, but it must be of one of your current elements. And also, if you already have more than one element, this is an opportunity to choose a composite impulse feat. There are 15 different composite feats, one for each pairing of the 6 elements. For example, there's something that is earth and fire that has the theme of lava, which is very cool. And you get also a gate junction for one of your elements. You have 5 choices. 1, you can get the impulse junction of your elements if you don't have it yet. So if you did dual gate at level 1, you get an impulse junction for one of your elements at this time. Or you can get one of these 4 other kinds. Critical Blast applies to critical hits with your Elemental Blast. Elemental Resistance gives you resistance to types of damage while your aura is active. An Aura Junction adds an effect to your aura, and this can benefit your allies or hinder your enemies. A Skill Junction makes you trained in a skill, or if you're already trained in that skill, a free training of another skill, and you get a +1 status bonus that's always active when your aura is in effect. This status bonus stacks with item bonuses from magic items, so you can be really strong in a certain skill, and I know Swing Whipper's watching and is probably going to comment about wrestling in the comments. So these are the 4 benefits in addition to the impulse junction that each of the 6 elements offers. So you can take a look at them. I'll note that if you choose Fork the Path, you cannot take a composite impulse feat as your impulse feat. These options are structured in a way that it rewards your earlier choices, so I like that. As for your proficiencies advancing, at level 7, your fortitude saves become a master, and you have the Pathfinder equivalent of evasion. A success becomes a crit success. At level 11, you do get the actual equivalent of evasion, and again at level 15, you become legendary in fortitude, which is pretty amazing. You're probably going to have the best fortitude save in the game. Also noteworthy, at level 11, you get reflow elements. When you do your daily preparations, you can replace one of your impulse feats with another one. It has to be of the same element type, however, but this means you're not railroaded and locked into the impulse feats you chose, which I think is a great feature. And this becomes twice as powerful at level 17. You get to do this with 2 impulse feats instead of 1. This follows the rules of retraining, however. You cannot replace that level 1 feat with a level 12 feat. And finally, your kind of capstone at level 19, your real capstone is your level 20 feat. But at level 19, at the start of every turn, if your aura is inactive, your aura just bursts out, and you could do your free 1-action blast or entering a impulse stance as part of that, and it's a free action. So those are the basic class features, and I'm going to not do a big survey of the feats and what you can do with feats as I've done with other shopping guides. I have had a busy few months, but I will point out a few things here and also highlight some very dramatic things you can do with the class in part 3 and do my combat demonstration in part 2, which will itself show a bunch of abilities. So yeah, these are your level 1 class feats that you can choose in addition to the impulse feats for your element. Elemental Familiar lets you have a familiar, and it also has the trait of one of your elements. With a higher level feat, your familiar can temporarily become an elemental. Extended Kinesis gives you more things you can do with basic Kinesis. Proliferate lets you spread an element that already exists. Regulate and Sculpt are limited to certain element types. With Regulate, you can heat or cool something so that it does 1 point of fire or cold damage, which can trigger weaknesses, and Sculpt lets you create crude tools. Versatile Blast lets you add another damage type to the blast that you can already do. And Weapon Infusion takes your versatility and multiplies it by 3. You get to shape your elemental blast into a weapon, which can do now bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage. It can include ranged weapons, such as a bow that shoots flame. And if it's melee, you can add either the agile, backswing, forceful, reach, or sweep traits. Those are some pretty impactful traits. And if it's ranged, you basically can put your ranged blast on a sliding scale of having longer range or having more damage, but having a shorter range. Remember, it doesn't have to be one of the 3 physical damage types. It can be one of the other damage types you can do with your blast. It has the infusion trait, which I should have explained earlier. It's like meta magic. It modifies an impulse, and it has to be immediately followed by the impulse it's modifying. And in this case, it is a free action, so you can do a 2-action bow of fire with 2 actions with this feat. At higher levels, there are more class feats, and these give you a whole variety of abilities that improve your flexibility, that let you change abilities midday, that improve your action economy. There's one feat that lets you embody your element, and you're like a fire elemental or water elemental. If you want to see a survey of more feats with other people who are like me, similarly analytically minded, people who are on my moderator team on my Discord, then I have an exclusive video, 2.5 hours for Patreon supporters for people to see. So that was my overview of the class. So now let's look at what any character can take if they want to get a little bit of Kineticist themselves. In Pathfinder, you can forego one of the class feats you get at even numbered levels to take an archetype feat. And at level 2, as early as level 2, you can take the Kineticist dedication. But you have to have a constitution of at least +2 or higher. This gives you one element you cannot dual gate. You get a kinetic aura, and you can do an elemental blast. However, unlike base Kineticists, you cannot get that free blast or stance as you enter your aura. Also, you do not do more than 1 die of blast damage. You're going to have to take improved elemental blast at level 8 and take it more times to improve the number of dice you do. So this definitely is not for replacing your primary attack from your class. But if you want to do Kineticist-y, bendery things. Level 4 gives you base kinesis. Then you have the usual archetype feats that let you take feats up to 1/2 your level. You get to add a second element starting at level 10, and at level 12, you can be an expert in your Kineticist class DC. Finally, we talk about the new subclass added for the Barbarian. Barbarians at level 1 choose an instinct, like dragon or giant or animal. Now we get the elemental instinct. At level 1, you get to channel elemental forces. You get one of the 6 elements at level 1. If your element offers more than 1 damage type, you have to choose one of them now. And when you rage, you get extra damage that's equal to your energy type. This extra damage must be of the damage type that you chose when you chose your element. You also additionally get this vortex around you that makes you concealed to ranged attacks. So it's a defensive buff. This level 2 class feat lets you add another damage type to what you could add when you rage. And this level 6 feat is pretty cool. 2 actions, there's no daily limit. You can just explode once per rage, doing your element's damage in a 15-foot emanation. And it's 1d8 damage per level you possess, and it's based on your class DC, which is strength as a barbarian. Very noteworthy is that when you rage with this instinct, normally when you rage, you cannot do concentrate actions. But in this case, you can do Kineticist impulses. This is clearly if you take the Kineticist archetype and get elemental blasts and other impulses. So this is intended to work like chocolate and peanut butter with the Kineticist archetype, so that in addition to being very angry and hitting people near you and exploding people near you, you can do the cool Kineticist feats and impulses specifically as well. And alas, I think this is the closest we're going to get to first edition Pathfinder's Blood Rager ever in this edition. We don't have any martial classes in Pathfinder 2e that cast spells. And I think that's a deliberate choice, and it's fine. Martials don't need to cast spells to be awesome in Pathfinder. So some final thoughts for this part 1 of the series on the Kineticist. First, I'm really excited for it. I do think that they hit the concept of the first edition Kineticist and have made it so much easier to run and to play and to build. It's kind of like how you went from 3,000 feats in first edition Pathfinder to choosing from a menu of 6 in second edition. It's kind of like that for building your Kineticist. There's just clear paths and directions that you can go. In first edition, they had the goal of giving you something that let you customize your element. So there's all these abilities that you could possibly choose from. And it also conveyed the fantasy of managing the potential of this alien power within yourself. And so you had a daily resource to track called burn. But it was complicated. The more burn you got, the fewer hit points you had, and you got something called elemental overflow that affected all of your kineticist powers and statistics. Also, you had infusions that added to the burn costs of your wild talents, and you also had class features which could be a constant lessening of the number of burn you had to spend on each wild talent. And you had gathering power, which could change which you spent actions on round to round. It was too much. Now in second edition, you have nothing to track. It's kind of an amazing feat what they did design-wise. You just have to worry about whether your aura is active, which is you can turn it on round 1 as your first action. And in that moment, whether you are going to be doing 2 actions on your elemental blast instead of 1. And there are other things you can do, the usual things you can do in Pathfinder of setting up your attack. And there's some infusions that can modify one of your kineticist powers that cost a whole action. But besides that, it's basically about managing your pool of action points. And you have 3 per round. I also like the clear build paths that are available. You can either specialize in one element or branch out. And we also have composite abilities where you can smoosh together 2 elements that no one else can do. That is very unique and cool. This is a class that rewards versatility. You're not going to outdamage the fighter or the barbarian, but you can definitely change your damage type on a dime. And you can do a whole variety of things that are not just I attack with your element, as we'll hopefully see in the combat demonstration and also in part 3. Also, we have our first true martial caster blend, I'll call it. We've had 2 hybrid classes which smoosh together spellcaster and martial in 1 character in the case of the magus, and in 2 creatures in the case of the summoner. But now we have something that's beyond the martial caster divide. And it's another direction where Paizo is innovating in D&D derived games, which I appreciate. You have no daily resources to manage. You don't have spell slots like a caster does. You don't have key points like a monk does in D&D 5e. And we also don't have focus spells, which is probably surprising to Pathfinder players. Those are the spells that you can recharge with rest between combats if you have 10 to 30 minutes. We don't even have that to track. And that fact alone tells me I think they made a conscious decision to present a relatively simple blaster. You don't have to track focus points. You just simply have to manage your actions. You just have a menu of things, powers, let's call them, that you can blast off on your turn. So we do have our blaster caster, quote unquote, in Pathfinder 2e. I hope you enjoyed that. Coming up is going to be part 2, in which I have a combat demonstration with 5 kineticists. And in part 3, I'm going to highlight some cooler abilities, including some high-level ones that kineticists can get. This is where we'll talk about some individual feats. And I just want to show on the screen the name of one of those feats and let you all look at that. What the hell is that? We'll see that in part 3. And if you have not already seen a version of this in the playtest Kineticist, leave a comment of what you think it is. I'd be curious to hear what people think this does. So that's it. If you haven't yet, join the Rules Lawyer Discord. We're now over 3,000 strong. Link in the description. It's a growing community of people who enjoy my channel and like to talk Pathfinder 2e and gaming. And it's also your chance to play Pathfinder 2e if you currently don't have one. There is a drop-in organized play system called Endless Tale Tavern, where you can take your character from adventure to adventure, gathering experience and loot on the way. And people also run the beginner box, and there are looking for game forums for people who want to connect. Also, support my Patreon if you haven't already. You get 7-day early access to most of my videos. And we also have exclusive content, including the 3-hour stream I previewed earlier of people on my Discord reacting to to the Kineticist and the 2 campaigns I'm running of running Pathfinder 2e for D&D YouTubers. So that's it. I am Ronald, the Rules Lawyer. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.